Hello, I'm Sora Luxon, and this is Lesson 8, Use the Pawn. I fixed my microphone a little bit, so hopefully there'll be less popping and hissing than the last time. Using the pawn. Sounds fairly provocative. But who's this pawn? You are. Well, we all are. Pawns to our reactions, motivations, our desires. Those are the things that control so many of our choices, and they're also the things we can be controlled by. But with diligence and magical training, you can learn to use the pawn yourself to build it into something more worthy of your abilities and intentions. Some practitioners call this part of the magical process becoming depolarized based on the polarity defined in Hermetic law, where all things have two poles, a negative and a positive charge. I'll discuss that a bit in Hermetic laws. I might even make another playlist for it. Others call it or work with it as fulcrum work. And that's kind of how they use it, where the neophyte begins engaging in applied daily practices, teaching themselves to become the fulcrum of his or her own habits and reactions, rather than continuing to be the utmost edge of a lever. Something that's wildly swinging up and down, that sort of an example or metaphor. There is a great short burst of power when you are sitting at the end of a seesaw, but the occultist knows that the real power and fundamental controlling force of the entire system in play is always at the center. The fulcrum, balanced, which is utterly stable and cannot ever be moved. Being the center of the system where the real dynamics are ruled is a far better position than being at the edges waiting for any counterweight to fling you up or down, right? Controlling every action and reaction you have. One of the darkest modern grimoires available to the public today, although you would never know it was that based on its disarmingly casual cover and commonplace title, refers to the practice of adept centering as silent judgment. There's actually a chapter called that in this book. Both teaching and defining its application with an intention and methodology that is so mistakenly ignorant of humankind's capacity for completeness that it made even me vaguely nauseous when I first read it, and I've gotten pretty good at these. Why am I mentioning that? Well, one, moving forward, I want to point out that information can come from anywhere. Just because it's packaged in a way your personal opinions might not agree with, doesn't mean it should be avoided or feared. Better to have that information than not. And if you have achieved a level of self-mastery that allows you to engage with less than savory materials safely without them having an effect on you unless you want them to, then there's really no reason why they should be avoided. Although always bearing in mind, with humility, that if you can't hold your ground in the face of an influencing force, like darker type reading materials, for instance, that you don't want to be controlled by them, and it's both courageous and powerful to be able to admit your limits. There's real courage involved in that. And then to step back and wait until you can approach something with the ability to maintain authority while working with it. It isn't weak to know when you're outmatched, right? It's only weak to not be able to admit it. I think Napoleon has a quote along those lines, right? A leader or great leader never has the right to be surprised. They have the right to fail, but not to be surprised. Same idea. You will grow and improve in your magic as you train. And as it strengthens, there will be little, if anything, in the way of informative sources that you could be outmatched or influenced by unless you choose to be. Secondly, it's important to know that magical law is the law. The fundamentals of it, teachings, practices, way to train, rules, how you improve your craft, they do not change. They've been around a long time. They hold an innate wisdom. And try to avoid the word truth, but it might be applicable here, an underlying foundational truth or realism. They work because of their merit. and so continue to be around and will continue to be around possibly until the end of mankind. For instance, saying an atom carries a positive or negative charge in science, right? That probably isn't something that's going to change as a fact anytime soon. And before we knew it was a fact, it was already always like that. Before people understood it or had named it or discovered it, right? And that universal law falls under the magic chromatic law of polarity. It isn't the teaching that changes because how it's known or because of how it's taught. It's the user. And magic, like anything else, can be taught in many ways, even though the teaching itself is not always to blame for how it's passed along. It's why and how a tool is employed that's going to have a useful or harmful effect. So despite the fact that it comes from a seriously gross source and is being held out to the public in a way that is incredibly harmful to all of the people who are going to learn from it, in this specific book, this darker format I'm referring to, this is still the same law at its core, the law of polarity. It's just how it's being taught here in the example I'm going to give that's so disturbing in this nasty little book. So what is it? What is this practice, this law, self-teaching that you can start that I'm talking about? You know when someone says something you don't like and you get angry? That's what I'm talking about. When someone says something that you like a lot and you get very, very, very excited, that's what I'm talking about. When someone else's opinion, comments, and yes, sometimes even actions, create a reactionary response in the self, that's called being highly polarized. And it is the easiest way for other people and things to control you. Being depolarized or becoming the fulcrum, instead of swinging wildly, centering and balancing the self in a clarity of mind that isn't opinionated or reactionary, as a rule, is how you take control. See, now in a dark grimoire, this talks about how being quiet or talking less will make others uncomfortable because of their ego states. And so they'll talk more and make mistakes or say something they shouldn't or feel weaker, more insecure, and you can use that against them, blah, blah, blah. Ick, right? And it doesn't work that way, really, because the person who's using it that way is still very much caught up in an egocentric state of trying to use other people. That's why they're buying this book that teaches it to them this way to use against others. That's why it's attractive to them, right? And because they are still caught up in that egocentric state, right along with the people they're trying to use, they're just as weak and pliable and simple to control themselves. All you'd have to do is offer them people to control, right? If they were employed somewhere as a lower employee, bribe them with a managerial position. There, desire fulfilled. Look how easy it was for me to buy that supposed master off. Pathetic. But I'm sure this illogical nonsense sells books to people who are easily fooled. If you train and employ building an authoritative internal state of balanced selfdom by growing past or accepting and dismissing petty egocentric states of emotion and mind, then you really can't be controlled or bought. You can't be bought off or shifted or moved against your will. When you're making your mind up, you're making your mind up. You aren't agreeing with an opinion that you already have. It's not going to influence you, and you're not going to disagree with anyone who has an opinion different than your own. It's not going to aggravate you and make you behave badly. In real occultism, you will be the only thing controlling you. And you won't be being extra quiet around others to make them feel off balanced or to catch them off guard. If you choose to employ that technique, you'll be doing it to empower yourself with no negative emotions or need to use others. And if your internal balance intimidates others, which is going to probably happen, or if it makes them uncomfortable, then you'll see that for what it really is. The same part of weakness in character or self or misunderstood recognition of internalized dismissal that you once had. There's another quote about forgetting history and creating its repetition, right? Someone who's forgets history is doomed to repeat it. Forgetting your own history, then, is likely not super wise or useful unless you want to spin your wheels. Empathy towards others isn't a wound. It's a way to claim swords. I'm going to be getting into the tarot eventually, so it's good to start using this word now. Anyone you raise up or give the opportunity to raise themselves up, right, becomes the most useful resource to themselves and others that they can be. That can help the person who helped them. I mean, do you really think Jedi are always trying to forgive and help the Sith return to the light because the Jedi don't have something better to do? They're the top of their order, right? Like the green one, Yoda, he's supposed to be like the highest level of their order. You don't think that people are offering to take him out to a nice luncheon in space somewhere, maybe? The shrimp cocktail, some champagne. There's a reason the good guys, quote unquote good guys, always win in the stories we tell. Even when they don't, they do. Because even when they lose short term, they win long term by reciprocal returns of energetic resource. Taking from a system only means eventually it's going to have to take from you to complete a whole, while giving to it means it'll close the circle by giving back to you. Magic is a circle. You can't loophole a circle. That's just not how the shape works. So, yes, being the quote-unquote good guy is a way stronger and more powerful position to take and hold as you begin your depolarization work. And it has very little to do with anyone's definitions of good or bad. I've been using those words. I know it's difficult to kind of separate them. They're hard to avoid. But there isn't really a way to discuss good or bad. It's just how a closed system works. And honestly, do you think a Jedi, one of the quote-unquote good guys, doesn't look bad or scary peeking out from under that hood that they wear, all spooky in the dark, right? Ready to jump out at the bad guy he's about to go all ninja on? Of course he does. That's how the people who oppose him are going to view him, because he's after them or after something they don't want to give him, right? To them, he's the bad guy. It's all just a matter of phonetics and opposing sides of the coin until you realize a coin is a coin and not its sides, right? Just like a fulcrum is a fulcrum and not the lever or the pendulum. Anyway, I don't mean to use this sci-fi metaphor so much, or science-based drama. I don't want to get the genre wrong or offend anybody. It just seems like a really good example that most people can recognize and relate to. I got really off track here. Or did I? This stuff is important to preface the larger topic and strategies I'm going to be giving you. And having the patience in place to hear this out first is important to the next step. So stay tuned for the next lesson, lesson 9, or as I'm going to call it, using the pawn part 2. And I'll actually explain the occult tools and rituals that you can use to begin depolarizing and strengthening the magical energy container that is you. Until next time.